The hotel room that prints receipts at 17 amperes. M. The first night, the receipt printer woke her. It coughed once in the dark, warmed its little brass roller, and began to spit out a strip of thermal paper that glowed faintly like a cigarette behind cupped hands. The room clock said 2:17 in pale blue digits. Vesper Klein lay very still in bed 5B at the Scissortail Hotel, a brick-walled midtown remnant on North Boston Avenue in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and listened to the tiny buzz and chirp as the machine printed, paused, and printed again, as if it were resuming a conversation it had been having without her for years. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? She had checked in late after a client dinner that went long on promises and light on dessert. The year was 2019, early November. The air outside clean after a narrow band of rain slid through, and the sidewalks shone like varnished stage floors. Vesper was 33, a freelance systems tech who patched networks for small hotels that couldn't afford to be down and couldn't afford to hire someone full-time. She traveled with a canvas tool roll, a spare router, a zippered pouch of adapters that looked like a magician's deck, and a mug with a hairline crack she liked to think of as its signature. The Scissortail was her kind of place. A lobby with a brass bell that had learned restraint, a front desk shelf of paperback mysteries for the taking, a night auditor who watched the door like a friend watches a house while you're out of town. He'd been the one to hand her the key card and the 2-page Wi-Fi map, Quill Penner, printed on a plastic badge, as if the name might be borrowed for the night. Night auditors aren't chatty by design, but Quill had leaned forward when she asked for the room farthest from the elevator. He'd said 5B is quiet most of the time, then paused, weighing whether to add something. He didn't. He pointed at the coffee station and said, "The cinnamon packets are the good ones." The printer sat on the desk under the window, small and stubborn, the kind of ticket machine you see in diners and old theaters. No USB cable trailed from it, which made Vesper grin in the dark because devices without visible leashes are both a challenge and a dare. The narrow receipt paper advanced in 2-inch bursts. The room smelled faintly of dust and citrus, the ghost of cleaning solution, and something else warm plastic maybe, or the metallic tang of heat on a coil. She slid out of bed, toes finding the rug, shoulders remembering every winter morning she had reached for her hoodie before her thoughts. The window showed a slice of downtown in sodium yellow, a parked truck with a tarp that breathed a little in the wind, a streetlight haloed just enough to be kind. She stood over the printer and watched it work. The top of the fresh strip read guest ledger at the margin, then a line of text that made her blink. Check-in, Harlan Row, rate $14.50, room 5B arrival, the 12th of October, 1958, comments, 2 pillows only. The paper was unbrowned, the font bold. She knew thermal stock fades to beige with sunlight, goes blotchy with time, and curls if you leave it near a vent. This looked new, but the data was from a year you had to say out loud to make it believable. The printer hummed again and produced another line. Check-in, Odetta Meyer. Rate, $12. Room, 5B. Arrival, the 4th of May, 1957. Comments, traveling with songbooks. She tore the strip and laid it flat on the desk, then pressed a finger to the cool plastic of the printer, as if touch might confess what the eye couldn't. The machine did not shake. It simply waited, polite as a clerk, with more to say. At 2:23, it stopped. A little green light near its only button winked twice like a made-up code. Vesper set the paper on a coaster, lay back down, and stared at the ceiling where the streetlight's slatted glow made a grid like a rehearsal. In 2 minutes, the heater clicked, the mini-fridge answered with its own throat clearing, and her body did the sensible thing it does when a problem cannot be solved and the hour is improper, it slept. Daylight always rationalizes the night. Vesper showered, dressed, and went downstairs with questions arranged in her mouth as if they were items on a parts list. Quill stood behind the desk with a pen balanced across his knuckles like a small seesaw. Room 5B printed receipts at 2:17, she said, like a person reporting a minor plumbing miracle. She slid the strip across. He read it, eyes moving left to right once, then again slower. He did not touch the paper, as if touching would make him complicit in whatever time wanted. He leaned in. You know how old buildings have old anchor points. You hang a new painting, but the wall still remembers the nail. He lowered his voice. That room was a manager's office back when this place was the Francis Motor Lodge. They kept the ledger in there, typed out receipts on a half-width machine bolted to the desk. At close, they printed a roll of check-ins for the night, tore it, and rubber banded the strip to the hardback ledger. Quill tapped the counter. Once, twice. I've heard the story since I was a kid, but the machine in that room was long gone when the Scissortail bought the building. That, he nodded toward the strip, is a thermal ticket printer from the last decade. We put it in to spit bar tabs during wedding weekends. He smiled without humor. The bar's downstairs. He told her what he knew, which was more than most people get for free before 10 in the morning. 2 nights a month, irregular but stubborn, the printer in 5B came alive at 2:17 and printed names from when the room was an office, and the office took cash, and the cash came with a handshake, and sometimes a song. Housekeeping had tried unplugging it, but the little machine held on to its paper and its green light like a dog holds a ball. Engineering had replaced it with a new unit. The new unit learned the trick too, as if the wire in the wall had a voice. Once, a manager put the printer in another room. It printed in the other room. At 2:17, Vesper asked the question an auditor would ask, "Why 2:17?" Quill lifted a shoulder. Night audit on the old system rolled at 2. The manager, a woman named Adelaine Merritt, he wrote in her diary, he gestured toward the wall where black and white photos of the old Francis hung in frames. The audit took 17 minutes most nights because the room charge calculation was slow. He winked, a habit to soften hard edges. That's what the Haunted History Tour says anyway. My grandmother worked housekeeping here in the 60s. She said Adelaine was the kind of woman who could silence a room by looking at a clock. Quill slid the strip back to Vesper. I don't put much stock in anything that prints on its own. But I don't stay in 5B either. She laughed, but softly. I'm the right kind of superstitious, she said. The kind that believes in loose cables and also in writing down names. She folded the strip, tucked it in her notebook, and promised the front desk a stronger signal on the north wing by supper. Work made the morning sensible. Vesper crawled into the equipment closet on 5, balanced her laptop on an inverted bucket, and watched packets move in tidy lines across her screen. The Scissortails network roamed like a polite guest slow if you needed it to be fast. Fast if you weren't asking. She pushed a firmware update, tuned channel widths, stood on a chair to re-angle a ceiling antenna the way you point your head to listen better. Lunch came from a food truck with a chalkboard menu and a line that made the air smell like cilantro and good intentions. She ate on the loading dock, the sun finding her cheekbones and telling her to stop worrying about things no one pays you to worry about. The second night, the printer coughed at 2:17 on the dot. The room's clock, which she had not trusted since it flashed 12:12 after she plugged her phone charger, matched her wristwatch exactly. The printed strip listed names, again, 5 this time, each with a rate that made the era plain. Miguel Corrado, Della and Sten Bay, Bellamy H. Cross, Traveling Sales, G. Whitlow. The comments field sometimes added a phrase that felt like a quotation. Traveling with songbooks, baby sleeps light, keep the radio low. She tore the strip and laid it beside the previous one. The heater ticked its approval. She sat cross-legged on the rug, laptop open, the printer's power cord draped across her thigh. If it's a room ghost, she murmured, it should ignore me. If it's a network ghost, I may as well listen. Her laptop saw the printer as a simple thing on the subnet, a networked ticket device with a default login and a queue history that should have been empty and wasn't. Vesper scrolled. A job log rolling back months logged exactly 2 entries each night with the flag source, Legacy. Someone had written a silly little module into the Scissortails aging property management system, a module that echoed old file structures for nostalgia tours during October. She'd seen that kind of thing done for fun. But this module contained descriptors she didn't recognize. Ledger spool, carriage return key, ribbon jam. These were words from a different machine. The audit program triggered at 2. The ghost queue called itself at 2:17. She checked where it pointed. The path wasn't a path, it was a device ID that didn't match any modern naming scheme. She pinged the device. No answer. She traced the MAC. The vendor code came back to a company that died before the internet had central registration. That made her skin feel too tight. In the morning, white coffee cups clacked, and the lobby television played low, the weatherwoman pointing at a band of storms where storms like to form. Vesper asked Quill if there were schematics for the old building. He pointed to the office behind the desk. Ground plan framed on the wall. Maybe useful. The hotel had been 2 buildings stitched at the seam. The Francis Motor Lodge on the east, a narrower annex that used to be a savings bank on the west, joined by a flyover corridor at 3 and a clumsy arch at 5. Room 5B sat where the old bank manager's office once had been, according to a penciled note at the edge of the plan. There, a scrawl, printer niche, in lighter pencil, spare line to basement. Quill warmed to the problem the way night auditors do when daylight invites them to be citizens. He called maintenance. A man named Orson arrived in a polo with his name stitched in blue and a toolbox that had its own opinions. Together, they moved the desk in 5B 6 inches and then 3 and exposed a painted-over conduit hole at the baseboard with a thumb-width chase running down into the wall. Orson whistled between his teeth. That's no Romex. That's armored cable from a generation that believed steel could keep time. He tapped the baseboard with the handle of his screwdriver. It answered with the hollow ring of an old closet. In the basement, they found the closet where the spare line went to not exactly die. The air was colder down there, humid the way the past is humid. A metal cabinet stood against the wall, padlocked, a gray panel humming like a neighbor practicing scales. Orson tested the lock with a pick he swore he hadn't lost. The door swung open. Inside, another little printer sat, twin to the one upstairs, its power indicator dark, its paper roll neat as a submitted term paper. A thin cable ran from a bracket down into a conduit box with 2 stories to tell. One was modern CAT cable, patched to the scissortails switch. The other looked like fabric-insulated wire on lead. Orson touched it with reverence and withdrew his hand. You shouldn't be alive, he murmured to the box. Then he turned to Vesper. Want me to pull the breaker for this room tonight at 2:15? See if it stops. She shook her head before she quite knew why. The motion felt rude. Let me listen once more, she said. Then, if it's a loop, we cut it. The third night, nothing is supposed to happen. Patterns prefer 3 as a way to make you distrust them. Vesper made tea in the room kettle with the cinnamon packet Quill had sworn by. She texted her brother a photo of the printer and a caption that read, Haunted Bar Bill. And he sent back the shrug emoji that meant, I love you, but weirdness is your brand. At 2:17, the printer began, but this time the sound rode a breath of air cold enough to raise her arm's small hairs. She stood close enough for the paper to curl against her knuckles and read each line as it arrived. Check-in. Adelaine Merritt. Rate. Comp. Room. 5B. Arrival. The 12th of October, 1958. Comments. Night audit. She reached for the strip and her fingers trembled, mildly, like a person handed the microphone at a small funeral. The machine whirred without printing for a count of 6, then resumed, the font just a touch lighter. Check-in. Quince Palmer. Rate $9.50. Room 309. Arrival the 12th of October, 1958. Comments, meeting at dawn. The room held its usual choir, fridge, heater, hallway, ice machine, 2 turns down, but behind it all she heard a soft clicking. Not printer, not clock. Keys. The slow press and release of typewriter keys. Somewhere not in the room and not far enough away. She froze, because freezing is a way of letting more senses work. Her body made itself a listening instrument. The keys whispered. Again, 3 strokes. Pause. 2. The printer spit a final line. End of ledger. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes, M. Vesper did what the body asks. She sat on the bed with the strip in her lap and waited for her breath to level. It did. The heater ticked, the fridge purred, the typewriter stopped pretending, the sound folded itself up and slid under the door. She slept because being a person who works with systems means you've learned to stack your fear on a shelf when there's nothing urgent to do with it. Morning turned the printer into a device again. She took the strip down to the desk. Quill stared at the word comp and the name he had heard his grandmother say on summer porches when the heat wanted out of the day. He asked to borrow the strip to show his manager, a woman with the fast walk gait of someone who plans 2 days all the time. The manager's name was Letha Croft, and she looked at the strip like a problem that could be solved with a memo. She was polite and firm. "We have tours on Fridays for the people who want goosebumps," she said. "We prefer to keep the goosebumps from rewriting our Google reviews." Vesper smiled, a tight little smile that said, "I won't post, I don't do that work, I just want to know what the wire knows." Letha sighed. The Scissortail was a college internship that never ended for her. The building was her thesis. She pointed at the framed photo behind the desk. Adelaine Merritt, hair pinned like a decision, stood at a wooden desk the size of a Buick, hand on a ledger book, face turned to a camera that had learned to respect her. The caption read, "Francis Motor Lodge, C1959, Night Manager." Letha lowered her voice. Family lore says Adelaine died at her desk in 2003 after the building had been empty 6 years because she refused to move a box when the bank wanted it. The family had the key to the back door from the old days. She snuck in sometimes to straighten things that did not require her. A neighbor saw her light. By the time anyone checked, the coffee had gone cold and she'd written the date on a yellow legal pad with a line under it, like an anchor. I don't know if the story is true. I do know names have a way of using rooms until you say them out loud and then they rest. That afternoon, Vesper sat on the floor of 5B with her laptop and a coil of patience. She sniffed the packets between server and printer and saw the little ghost job present a string of bytes at 2 minutes past 2, announce itself as ready at 2:16, and request the queue at 2:17 with a line that included a date spelled in words, not numbers. October 12. She set a capture to record it tonight. She did not know what she would do with the proof, but the act of capturing felt like putting a box around a wild thing without requesting its death. The fourth night, she did not sleep. At 2:16, the room gathered itself. At 2:17, the printer began. The first name landed like a quiet gavel, Harlan Rowe. Again, as if the ledger wanted to list the set that belonged with the date, as if the building had a playlist for that night and needed it to end correctly. The second name, Odetta Meyer. The third, Quince Palmer. The machine word, then it printed a line that wasn't a line she understood. Checkout, A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. Balance, $0. Drawer, locked. The room changed temperature by a needle's width. The way a body registers changes a thermostat does not. The typewriter sound returned, louder, as if the keys had moved closer, as if someone had rolled the desk chair to the doorway. Vesper stood. The bathroom light made a rectangle on the carpet. She turned it off and let the room be only the room. In the dark, a kind of courtesy arrived. She spoke to the space like a person speaks to a skittish animal. "I hear you," she said softly. "I see what you print. If you're finishing something, finish. If you need a witness, I'm here." The keys worked once, gently. The printer fed a final inch and stopped. The heater clicked off, as if called on. The fridge made a small, delighted sound, the way fridges do when they extract a victory from physics. Vesper lay down slowly, like a person trying not to wake a toddler, and watched the window make a square on the wall. She did not sleep much. She did not feel punished by that. On Friday, Quill called his grandmother. She came in with a smile that wore 80 years as if they were a favorite cardigan. Her name was Thalia Penner. She had hands that did hair buns right the first time and eyes that counted change without looking. She stood in 5B and curtsied to the air, lightly, like a joke only the past finds funny. She pointed at the baseboard where the printer niche had been long before this printer knew it was one. And she told a story the way people in the middle of the country tell them, in straight lines, with pauses for the parts that don't quite behave. Back when the Francis was a stop on the oilfield run, she said, Adelaine kept books for men who couldn't read receipts and kept rooms for women who didn't need to be asked why they traveled alone. She printed the audit every night, tore the strip, tucked it under the ledger ribbon, and locked the drawer. Her niece said she was proud of how long she could do the math in her headroom tax, city tax, discount for the flood man whose boots never dried. When the hotel closed in 1997, Adelaine kept a key. In 2003, she came in one last time to make the numbers even. She wrote the date, she drew a line. She put her hand to her chest like she was looking for a pen and fell as neat as folding a shirt. The firemen took 10 minutes to arrive. I put flowers on the door, and then the bank put a new lock on the door, and then time put dust on the lock and years on us all. Thalia reached out and touched the printer as if it were the hem of a dress in a department store window. Adelaine believed in drawers that closed, she said. It sounds like over again at 2:17, she gets to do that part, finish the roll, tuck it in, say goodnight to accounts. She is the kind of woman who would find that worth doing. Vesper spent Saturday building a workaround that no manager had asked for and no ghost could be fooled by. She pre-programmed a rule in the printer's network profile. At 2:16, the device would capture its own print job to a text buffer and email it to a special address she made for the Scissortail historian. Proof for people, paper for the room. At 2:15, she and Orson stood in the basement closet like two burglars having second thoughts. Orson touched the breaker switch. He looked at her. She did not nod. He did not flip it. Upstairs in 5B, the printer coughed, purred, and worked. Down here, the old gray panel vibrated, soft as sleep. At 2:20, Vesper's email pinged her phone with a single message. Subject, ledger. Body, 3 lines. Names, rates, the comp, the sign-off. Prepared by A. Merritt. Time, 2:17 amperes. M. She did not sleep that night. She didn't mind. She lay on the bed, hands behind her head, and watched the room recede from what rooms are in daylight containers, shelves, angles, and become what rooms are when you let them be churches. Limits, repetition, silence between notes. She thought about drawers, about the way her work was mostly closing things in the right order so strangers could open them and recognize what they saw, about how a hotel is a machine for forgiving you for not being home. On Sunday, she checked out. She left a thank you envelope at the desk with Quill's name written in neat engineer's block. In it, a printout of the email rule and a small drawing she'd made of the baseboard hole with an arrow labeled here, "The wire remembers." Quill held the envelope like it might be heavier than it was. Letha met her at the door. "I can't exactly put this in a maintenance request," she said, meaning the week Vesper had just spent listening to a machine be more honest than any of them owed their jobs. "But I can tell you what we can do. We can frame a copy of your email in the staff room and call it the drawer letter. We can show it to anyone who works past midnight and forgets that ending is a kindness. We cannot run a Halloween promo in 5B because some stories don't belong to customers. We cannot unplug the thing that works for someone who isn't here anymore." Vesper smiled. That's more than most places do for the living. She drove out of Tulsa with the radio off, south, then east, then north again, the planes rolling around her like a low lullaby. She stopped at a gas station where the coffee was too strong and therefore perfect. She called her brother to tell him a story with no real twist and therefore true. She didn't say the name of the printer because sometimes a tool deserves privacy. She didn't say the name of the woman who closed drawers because she had said it enough. She didn't say 2:17 because she had learned to say it in her head as a kind of vow to be kind to the people who work at that hour. Months later, back in Tulsa for a different job in a different building, she walked past the Scissortail one evening just before Christmas when the lobby held a neighbor party. A small tree wore strands of tickets in place of garland bar tabs printed for fun, red inked with dates and little notes in flare pen script. Quill waved from the desk, a Santa hat angled to keep his dignity. Letha stood by the fireplace talking to a city inspector whose expression said he had learned to sleep at last. On the stair, a woman in her 50s, adjusting an ugly sweater, looked at Vesper in that way strangers sometimes look at one another, as if they had agreed to be in the same hallway before they were born. Vesper stopped in for a minute. She drank cider from a paper cup. She left before anyone could ask for a funny story with a good ending. She slept at a chain hotel by the interstate where the printer in the lobby spat bills for bottled water and where midnight meant nothing in particular. At 2:17, she woke and smiled at the ceiling, not because any machine had called to her, but because she had trained her body to stand witness for a time that belongs to other people. She poured water into a glass and listened to the small sound it made when it met the bottom, hollow turning to full. She said the name she had been given as if returning a borrowed book. She slept again. If you ever find yourself in a hotel room and a device on the desk prints at a time that sounds like a secret, do what Vesper did. Don't yank the cord. Don't film it for the internet like proof is a currency and this is your chance to spend. Sit up, put your feet on the rug, read the names if names arrive. If you can, make a rule that gives the living something to hold a copy, a note, an email to a person whose job is to remember. Then, let the room have its paper. Let the drawer close. Say thank you to the time that isn't yours. The night staff everywhere will feel it like a hand they don't have to see. And if you must know, it goes like this. The little green light winks, the paper unfurls. The names Harlan, Odetta, Quince, Adelaine roll by, small and austere and whole. The room changes by a breath, the heater stands down, the fridge on duty hums, the typewriter in the wall or the idea of a typewriter slides one last carriage to the right and returns. The drawer locks. The ledger for that one night balances again. You will not have been asked to fix anything. You will not have been asked to believe. You will have been asked to witness. A job that counts. When dawn smears light along the window, when the city yawns and rolls, when the night auditor hands the keys back to daytime and goes home to sleep in a room with a plant that knows their voice, you will have been part of the smooth that makes this complicated world possible. Somewhere, a printer coughs once more, polite as always, and waits another 24 hours to do what it knows on the dot without apology. If, later, someone asks why a small hotel on North Boston Avenue keeps a finicky old ticket machine in a room that could rent for $2 more without it, you can say this. Not every device has to justify itself in money. Sometimes a machine is a ritual. Sometimes a ritual is a receipt that proves someone was here and did their work and went to sleep. And sometimes, at 2:17 in the morning, a woman who once locked a drawer she loved gets to do it again, which is as reasonable a reason as any you'll hear for anything that persists in this country, shaped by roads, rooms, ledgers, and the soft insistence of people who finish what they start. The babysitter's last text. Who's upstairs? The text came at 9:58 on a wet Friday in early November, the screen lighting the dim kitchen of a craftsman house on Maple Ridge Avenue in the town of Larkspur, Pennsylvania. The babysitter had written only 3 words, spaced as if she had to force her thumbs to move. Who's upstairs? Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Her name was Ione Kestrel, a college sophomore who took evening jobs to pay for studio art supplies and a public transit pass to the city. She was a quiet soul with a quick wit, the kind of person who noticed the way rain made halos around streetlights and the way children's laughter changed when they grew tired. 2 kids slept under that roof that night, a 6-year-old boy named Briar and his 3-year-old sister named Lark. Their parents, Rowan and Maeve Harrow, had left at 7:15 for an anniversary dinner at a restaurant by the river. The year, if you need to understand the way phones hummed and doorbell cameras watched, was 2019. The house at 42 Maple Ridge was one of those old American stories, built in wood and memory, a deep porch with a swing that complained just enough to be charming, oak floors that spoke out loud when the humidity changed, crown molding thick as a picture frame. At the back, a narrow staircase rose from the mudroom to a short landing, and then up again into the second floor where the bedrooms sat in a row like well-behaved children. At the top of the main stairs, there was a crawl-space door that had once led to a linen closet and now led to a barely insulated wedge of attic, hot in summer and sharp with cold in winter, the kind of door that makes a welcome thud when it closes and an unwelcome thud when it doesn't. Before the Harrows left, they did all the small, loving rituals. Maeve set out a plate of sliced apples, a bowl of popcorn, and a note that read, "Help yourself to anything except the scotch." Rowan pointed to the thermostat and said the heat pumps kick on if the temperature dips. Fancy house, but the bones are stubborn. He smiled at Ione in the doorway, hair damp from the drizzle, denim jacket dotted with rain. Text us if the storm knocks the power out. Text us if the kids wake and ask for the song about the lighthouse. Text us even if you think it'll make us look overprotective. It won't. At 7:30, the children were bathed, pajamaed, and nestled into beds that smelled faintly of line-dried sheets. Ione read the lighthouse song twice, and the little girl fell asleep with a hand on the brother's shoulder, a tether strong enough to hold a moon in place. At 8, the dishwasher hummed its modest lullaby. At 8:20, the rain came harder, dropping like a handful of pebbles thrown by a polite intruder. At 8:42, the doorbell camera pinged, announcing a raccoon with ambitions. Ione's phone ticked with messages from a group chat, small bursts of jokes and memes. She answered two and then set the phone face down, because she had promised herself she would be the kind of sitter who watched and listened. She put a kettle on. She chose a mug with a hairline crack because hairline cracks reminded her of river maps. She stood at the back window and watched the alley, where a single streetlight blew a cone of yellow onto the wet blacktop like a candle someone had forgotten to snuff. At 9:21, a floorboard spoke upstairs. It was not the sound of a child rolling over and not the polite pop of wood releasing humidity. It was a stepped-on sound, slow and weight-bearing, forward and then a tiny, deliberate back. Ione took one breath, then another. The kettle clicked off. The house returned to its normal choir. She checked the baby monitor screen. Two small forms slept. The greenish night vision painting dreams onto their faces. She told herself she knew old houses. She told herself wind can make timber say things it doesn't mean. At 9:36, the sound came again, above the kitchen this time, in the hallway between the children's rooms. One step and another. A long pause. Then the faintest scrape, as if someone had scuffed a shoe and then, embarrassed by the sound, tried to rub it out with the sole. The kind of scrape that turns the air thin. Ione lifted the house phone from its cradle because old houses carry old phones like relics. No dial tone because this was 2019 and the landline was a costume. She put it back and picked up her cell. No missed call, no alert from the doorbell camera. She opened the parent's contact, hovered, did not press. First, she would look, she would be careful. She would not give Rowan and Maeve a reason to race home on wet roads unless there was a reason. She climbed the back stairs because they felt less like a stage. Each step was shallow and careful. The rain softened to a hiss. Her breath became a guest she had to host with manners. At the landing, the air grew cooler. She could see down the short hall into the little boy's room, the lighthouse nightlight casting a steerable arc of white. She could see the girl's room door nearly closed, just enough to make a crescent, the way some children like it. She could also see the crawlspace door at the top of the main stairs. It was closed, latch turned. That mattered more than it should have. She waited. Sometimes the house wants to know if you have patience. Sometimes it will reward you with silence. Sometimes it will not. There was a third sound, not a footfall this time, but a breath. Not hers. Not a child's soft, open-mouth exhale, but the kind of breath that pauses at the end like it is tasting the air. It came from the darkness beyond the crawlspace door, except the door was shut. Ione felt the tiny hairs along her forearms confess themselves to fear. She stepped into the boy's room. He slept with his mouth open just a little, lower lip shiny. Good. She stepped to the girl's room. Little Lark had turned onto her stomach, stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Good. When Ione moved back into the hall, her eyes caught something at the far end where the light thinned. A strand of damp hair lay across the floorboards, faint as a pencil mark, a single narrow ribbon that did not belong to either child. It glistened. She knelt without thinking and picked it up. Cold. Clean. Long enough to belong to someone grown. She stood up too quickly and steadied herself with a hand on the wall. Her palm pressed into a nail head that had been painted over and sanded down so smooth it felt like a coin. She thought the oddest thought then. If I press that nail in, will the crawlspace door open by itself? She smiled at herself because fear makes even introverts dramatic in their own skulls. She returned to the back stairs, slow and exact, and only when she reached the fourth step from the bottom did she glance at her phone. The time read 9:58. The text she sent herself, as if letting the words exist outside her head could make them smaller, was only 3 words. Who's upstairs? She meant to send it to Rowan. She meant to send it to Maeve. She meant the message as a half joke with a serious underlayer. But the thumb that had learned to move fast learned the wrong dance. It went to her friend in the group chat, and by the time she realized, the message had already become a tiny flare in half a dozen pockets around town. Her friend replied with, "What are you doing?" and also joking, right? And also put them on speaker. Ione did not reply. She set the phone on the counter face up this time. She took the largest knife from the drawer and then immediately put it back because knives are not courage and courage is not noise. She chose instead a heavy flashlight from the mudroom shelf, the kind that doubles as a hammer. She clicked it on. The beam carved a clean white tunnel along the baseboards. She moved to the bottom of the main staircase now, because if fear wants you to circle, wisdom wants you to cross. The newel post was worn as a handshake. Family photographs climbed the wall. A wedding photograph near the bottom showed Rowan in a blue suit and Maeve in a dress with sleeves that looked like light. Higher up, a picture of Briar in a lion costume, nap-flattened mane, grinning with the sincerity only a 6-year-old can manage. Above that, near the top, a framed landscape. The glass reflected the flashlight beam like a lid. Halfway up, she paused. There was that breath again. Not a cough, not a snore. A breath like someone who had been holding still too long and had to remind their body to keep doing the automatic things. The sound came from beyond the last step, in the shadow to the left, where the crawlspace door Saturday. It was closed, latch turned. She aimed the beam at the brass. The metal showed a fog that had not been there a minute ago, condensation, from a mouth that had exhaled near it. She kept her own mouth shut because you cannot take breath back once it is out. The latch moved. It moved too gently to be gravity. It made the tiniest metal-on-metal sigh. Then it stilled, as if the person behind the door had realized they had announced themselves and decided to pretend nothing had happened at all. Ione's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was firm in the way a music teacher's voice is firm when she asks a child to stop tapping the desk with a pencil. "I'm a babysitter. The police are on their way. If you are a neighbor who has made a mistake, this is your chance to leave without me seeing your face. If you are not a neighbor, this is your chance to decide to be one." Nothing moved, but the house did a small thing then. It clicked. A sound traveled through the baseboards from kitchen to parlor like a cricket chirp. The refrigerator compressor had kicked on. The world had not narrowed to only this door. She stepped higher. She brought the beam closer to the latch. She did not touch it. She watched a drop of moisture on the brass slide very slowly toward the handle and then stop, held by a force that did not want to be named. From the children's rooms, nothing. From outside, rain. From down the hall, a draft like someone had opened a mouth to speak and then decided not to. She took the phone, thumb shaking now not from drama, but from the body's strange understanding of scales. She typed 911 and the call went through on the first chime. The dispatcher answered with a first name and a county. Ione told that calm voice her name, the address, the fact of 2 sleeping children, the fact of a locked door with breath behind it that did not belong to the family. The voice said, "Officers are on the way." The voice said, "Stay on the line." The voice said, "Do not open the door." So she did not. She watched it the way you watch a stage when you know the performer is already in the wings. She told the dispatcher every small thing she saw. The latch is fogged. The brass is pitted near the screw head. The paint around the jamb is chipped the way it chips when someone tries to open a door with a butter knife. The dispatcher asked about the kids, and she told her about the lighthouse song because sometimes the answer to a safety question is a story that proves you are paying attention. It took 6 minutes for the first cruiser to roll into the alley, though those 6 minutes ran long like string you cannot find the end of. 2 officers climbed the porch steps, rang the bell softly out of habit, then tried the knob and announced themselves. Ione walked down the main stairs, not taking her eyes from the crawlspace door, unlatched the front door, and stepped back quickly so the officers could enter. Their names were Officer Tamsin Dupre and Officer Hal Moran. They were young enough to still wear the job like a coat borrowed from a bigger relative, and old enough to know when to keep their weapons holstered because children were sleeping. Ione pointed. The hall was framed now by their bodies and the yellow hallway light, and the cleaner light of the flashlight. Officer Dupre nodded, raised a hand to let silence accumulate, and then approached the door with a slowness that reminded Ione of a conductor raising a baton before the first downbeat. Dupre put 2 fingers lightly on the latch and did not move it. She bent, eye to the thin seam between door and jamb. She inhaled. She did not exhale for a count of 3. Then she did, a controlled tide. She mouthed one word to Moran. There. Moran moved with that cop-slow speed that reads as kindness until it becomes a tackle. He positioned himself on the knob side. Dupre took the hinge side. They counted without sound. Moran turned the knob and pulled. The door did not open. Dupre drove her shoulder low into the panel, and the old wood decided to be new and gave with a crack that sounded like an ankle breaking far away. The space beyond was small, angled, cluttered, with things families save because they carry stories in them. A fan with no blade, a suitcase with travel stickers that meant Paris had existed once for someone in this house, 3 plastic bins of children's clothes marked in black marker, a broken chair that had not given up, and a person, folded into the angle between floor and pitch, knees under chin, face turned away from the light, hands empty and ready to lie about it. Dupre said, "Do not move." Moran said, "Show me your hands." The person did not show their hands. They lifted their left shoulder like someone about to stand in a narrow coffin, and then realized there was no way to both stand and not be seen. They kept their face turned. A smell came from the small hot space that was not attic smell. It was sweat and wool and rain and a cologne Ione could not name but would recognize for years in crowds and feel a short-lived lightning in her spine. The person finally shifted enough for the light to catch their cheekbone. Smooth, young, the jawline of someone who still believes they can sneak back to the version of themselves that did not make this choice. Dupre reached. The person flinched, then stilled. Moran took the wrists, quick. Plastic cuffs clicked, and Saturday. The person whispered one word so fast and so quiet, it sounded like a sound and not a word. Please. There are nights when a house rearranges what you know about it. There are nights when law and luck arrive at the same time and dress alike so you cannot tell who deserves the thank you. There are nights when children sleep through the loudest noises and wake to the softest ones. Briar woke when Officer Dupre gently asked Ione if the boy had a favorite song she could sing while they stepped this stranger past his doorway and into a world that would be, for the stranger, smaller and heavier. Ione sang the lighthouse song, the boy rolled over, the girl sniffed twice and then reclaimed her rabbit. The name given at the kitchen table later, with the cuffs off and the hands folded around a paper cup of tap water, was Corin Vale. He was 22, a barback at a music venue downtown, a part-time mover for a storage company on the edge of town, a person whose landlord had changed the lock that very afternoon because rent was late again, and who had wandered past the Harrow's house just after 9, watching rain stencil shadows on the porch. He said the front porch light was off, that the back alley light was the kind that made him nervous because it buzzed. He said he had once done a job in this very house, moving boxes after Maeve's mother passed, that he knew the crawlspace door did not always latch if you pushed too hard. He said all this in a way that sounded like memorized lines. Officer Moran left for a minute and returned with a small bag-tagged chain of custody. Inside, a multi-tool with a narrow flathead blade that would fit under a painted jamb and lever it without much damage, a pair of cheap cotton gloves, damp, a folded postcard someone had intended to mail, featuring a lighthouse on the coast of Maine, and a note written in pencil that read, "We are well, love you, see you in December." The postcard had not been addressed yet. Corin looked at the lighthouse as if it had insulted him. "Why?" Officer Dupre asked. "Are you in a crawl space with a multi-tool?" Corin said he wanted to get out of the rain. He said he saw the back door wasn't fully latched. He said he knocked, and no one answered. He said he stepped inside to be out of the weather. He said he heard children, and then realized he had made a mistake and was trying to hide until he could unmake it. He said he had not gone near the bedrooms. He said he had not taken anything. He said most lies are just a breath away from the truth if you hold the breath long enough. The doorbell camera proved he had never rung. The back door, which Ione had locked after the raccoon, had not been forced, which meant the multi-tool had met the strike plate and learned a new way to talk. The thin condensation on the latch proved his face had been inches from the brass, as if he were listening through metal to weigh his chances. The damp hair on the hallway floor did not match Ione or the children. It matched Corin. The officers did not say poetry out loud, but sometimes evidence makes a poem whether or not you want it. Rowan and Maeve arrived at 10:28, windblown and wet, faces open with fear, and then with the specific relief parents make when they count the number of children and find the number unchanged. Maeve thanked Ione, then thanked Officer Dupre, then thanked the kettle for existing because it gave her hands something to do. Rowan walked to the base of the main stairs and looked up at the crawlspace door and put his hand on the newel post like a man greeting an old friend and apologized under his breath to the house for not knowing it needed him tonight. The rain slowed. The streetlight outside defined every leaf as if auditioning them for a brighter job. Corin Vale sat at the kitchen table and looked smaller and then larger and then smaller again, the way a person does when they realize they have chosen a story they cannot revise. He asked for a lawyer then, as was his right, and the night shifted into a new shape with paperwork and phone calls and the sound of zippers on evidence bags. Later, after the officers had gone and the house had been put back in order with all the rituals humans use to convince themselves the world is knowable, Rowan stood on the porch and stared at the street. A car hissed by, tires whispering on wet asphalt. Somewhere a train declared itself. He turned when Ione stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and the brittle, beautiful calm people make after the danger has taken its hands off their shoulders. He said thank you a dozen ways that did not use the word thank. She said, of course, a dozen ways. That meant I am shaking on the inside, but I am still here. Maeve joined them, the porch light warming the edges of her hair, and the 3 of them stood in a small triangle like a warning sign no one else would read. When Maeve spoke, her voice had a new floor under it. We will change the locks. We will reinforce that door. We will move the postcard basket. We will install a sensor that turns on a light at the slightest motion. We will do the things that let us sleep. Ione nodded and did not say that sleep would come with its own sounds now. The sound of a breath behind a door. The sound of a latch fogging. The sound of a floorboard speaking the truth. There is a detail the police report will not mention because police reports must make simple lines out of crooked nights. At 9:59, after sending the text to the wrong chat and before calling emergency services, Ione leaned her forehead against the cool plaster of the stairwell for the space of 1 heartbeat. She whispered something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a promise. Okay, if someone is up there, I will not be the person who opens the door and invites them in. I will be the person who names the danger out loud. Sometimes that is the whole difference. Not bravery that charges, but the steadiness that refuses to be tricked into being polite to danger. The next morning, the November sky tried on a bland blue and liked it. The town of Larkspur went back to the work of a Saturday. Kids in hoodies kicked at leaf piles. The bakery line wrapped twice around the counter. A woman in a gray coat standing by the river thought the water sounded like someone ripping silk very slowly and wondered who she would tell that to. Ione slept past noon and woke to a peanut butter text from Maeve, which read in that shaky grammar of gratitude, "Come by for dinner anytime. And also, I found your denim jacket on the porch swing. And also, there will be pie tonight if you want pie." She smiled and answered with too many thank yous and 1 yes to pie. She showered longer than she needed to, stood still in the water in a way that made time into a warm curtain, then dressed in gently clean clothes that smelled like detergent and a future. When she stepped outside, the air had that crisp edge. That means the first hard frost has already visited and left behind a postcard of itself on every windshield. Maple Ridge Avenue looked like an old movie taught to speak color. She walked past houses that had their curtains open a little wider than usual, past neighbors who held eye contact just a second longer, the way people do when the story has almost become a myth and they want to remind themselves it is still shaped like a person. On the Harrow's porch, there were new screws in the latch. The crawlspace door upstairs had a length of wood screwed diagonally across it like a stern eyebrow. A small motion sensor had been installed in the hall. It blinked a polite green and then went to sleep. The kids were in socks, sliding across the floor, laughing the laugh that children make the morning after a storm when the yard is new again. Rowan handed Ione a slice of apple pie on a paper plate and said again what he had said the night before, but with the daylight, making his voice warmer. You kept your head, you called, you stayed steady. That is the whole job sometimes. We will tell people that part when we tell them the story. Not who he was, not what he said, not the smell. We will tell them you named the danger and didn't let it decide your speed. The town told the story in its own ways. The newspaper, which had been saved from extinction by a stubborn editor named Lita Quinn, wrote a piece with the careful headline, "Babysitter's Quick Thinking Leads to Arrest in Overnight Burglary Attempt." The group chat learned, gently from Ione herself, that sometimes jokes congeal into myths, and myths can be mean. At the music venue, a bartender wiped the length of the bar 3 times, then once more, then stopped. At the storage company, a supervisor stared at a stack of moving blankets and tried to add up what the numbers meant about people. There is not a moral here, sharp and so clean it can cut bread. There is not an ending where everyone claps and the house resumes being only a house. There remains a door with a new diagonal board and screws that will loosen over time and be tightened again. There remains a boy who will ask, on a night 2 weeks later when rain drums the gutter, "Can you sing the lighthouse song one more time?" And a girl who will say, not the part where the foghorn sounds, that part sounds like a giant in the crawl space. There remains a young man named Corin, whose first court date will arrive with a sky the exact color of the alley light, and who will have to decide whether to say the word sorry to the ceiling or to the faces in the room. At 9:58 on some future night, a phone will light in some other kitchen in some other town, and a person will type 3 words spaced out as if their thumbs had to be convinced. Who's upstairs? If you are that person, hear this story as a map of breath. Name the danger, make the call, keep your voice exactly as loud as it needs to be and no louder. Stand where you can see doors and hallways. Carry light. Remember that a latch that fogs is a sentence the house is trying to say. Let the sentence finish. If you are listening from a city, may the traffic outside be ordinary and honest. If you are listening from a farmhouse that knows every creek by its first name, may the wind be the only guest tonight. If you are listening in a small apartment where the neighbor's footsteps already live in your ceiling, may you learn the grammar of each tread so well that the first strange syllable tells you exactly what to do. The babysitter's last text was a question pointed upstairs, but the real end of the story is how she answered all the other questions pointed at her. Will you panic? Will you try to be polite when the moment calls for clear? Will you open a door because silence asked sweetly? She chose no, no, and no. She chose the shape of a steady voice on a thin line. She chose to be the reason the house could go back to being only wood and memory. Some nights, when she passes the harrows by chance and the porch swing is still, she hears only the rain and the river, and that is enough. Some nights, she hears the old door upstairs settle as the heat kicks on and thinks, with a small smile, that even a house can be taught to breathe more quietly. And on the better nights, every window along Maple Ridge holds a square of light cut, perfect as a fresh slice of pie, and the street keeps its watch, and the children sleep so deep the world could rewrite its rules, and they would wake to the new rules fresh and ready to be memorized. If that happens where you are, tell me when. Tell me what the air smells like. Tell me the hour, spoken slowly so the world cannot run away with it. Tell me if the latch on your upstairs door is dry and dull or a little fogged from someone's breath. Tell me if you are holding a mug with a hairline crack that looks like a river map. Tell me if the house has taught you any of its words. And if your phone lights at 9:58 and the message reads as simple and terrible as a knock, remember the kitchen in Larkspur and the steady girl in the denim jacket, and say out loud to no one and to everyone, not tonight, not on my watch, not in this house. Neighbors heard a piano at 3 amperes. The house was empty. Neighbors heard it first at 3 in the morning. A piano coming through the thin Savannah fog, like a voice behind gauze. Bright, deliberate. Not a practice scale, but a song shaped by hands that knew what they were asking the instrument to feel. Windows glowed weakly along Jones Street. Porch fans turned lazily, pushing warm air that smelled like iron and rain. The music came from number 119, the Carpenter House, which stood empty, locked, listed, and waiting. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? The year was 2019, late August, heat pressing the city flat. The Carpenter House had been vacant since early summer, after an estate sale peeled it of rugs and lamps and the porcelain spaniel that used to guard the hearth. The last owner, a retired piano teacher named Odile Carpenter, had passed in late spring. Her nieces lived up in North Carolina, good people by all accounts, but too far away to keep fresh flowers on the mantel. Realtors came and went with their careful smiles. Contractors measured crown molding and murmured about old wiring. But at 3 in the morning, the house was nobody's, and then very suddenly, everyone's. Caius Mercer lived across the street in an apartment above a bookstore that smelled like paper and cedar oil. He was 37, a sign painter by trade, a listener by habit. At 3:02, he stepped onto his balcony with a glass of water and a small, unreasonable hope that the sound would be a radio left on in a passing car. It wasn't. It had the weight of wood and felt and string. It had the soft percussive bloom that only happens when hammers strike and then get out of the way. He thought of the names of pieces like someone reciting Saints, Nocturne, Arabesque, Consolation, and then recognized the one it was. Claire de Lune played a hair slower than most, with crescendos that rose like someone standing up carefully from an old chair. He could hear the rubato in the right hand, the left hand anchoring, a conversation between patience and longing. The melody reached for the air over Forsyth Park and came back with a question. Caius put on shoes. On the sidewalk, humidity wrapped him in a damp shawl. Moths battered the street lamp. Down the block, a delivery truck sighed at a stop sign. The music continued. Not perfect, not sloppy. Human. Nora Bly stepped from the shadows of her courtyard with a leash looped around her wrist, her old hound Amos peering from behind her knees. Nora was 68, the kind of neighbor who knows who is supposed to be where and when. She tilted her head. Your radio. Her voice made it a question. Or is that in the house? It's in the house, Caius said, and the words made the night hold itself differently. They were not the only ones. Mr. Patel from the corner bodega came up the steps wiping flour from his hands because insomnia likes small projects, and he had been making dough for morning pastries. On the second floor of a yellow clapboard place, a girl in a college sweatshirt cracked her window and frowned. An Uber drifted past and slowed. Even the driver leaned, listening. At 3:08, Nora called it in. She had a way with dispatchers, polite, precise, impossible to ignore. House is listed vacant, number 119 Jones. We have audible music consistent with a live piano. We are gathering out front. Please send a unit to clear the property. She gave her name, spelled it, gave her number, spelled it, and ended the call with thank you in a tone that made the words into a promise. 2 patrol cars rolled up at 3:17. Blue lights turned low so they washed the houses in a suggestion instead of a demand. Officer Malik Rhodes took the steps 2 at a time, his hair braided neatly, a scar like a grace note at the corner of his mouth. Behind him came Officer Lori Fenwick, steady and compact, the kind of person who never lost track of where the nearest door was. They paused at the front door. The music did not pause. In the short stillness between measures, you could hear the damp city breathing. Let me try the realtor box first, Fenwick said. Odile's nieces had left a lockbox hooked to the iron rail. Fenwick called the on-call number posted on the yard sign, woke a man named Barrett, whose voice came up out of sleep like a diver out of deep water, and got the code. She opened the box, palmed the key, glanced at Rhodes. He nodded. She unlocked the door. Inside, the air moved in waves. The foyer smelled like lemon oil and old paper. A staircase curved up like a question mark. To the left, the front parlor opened wide, and there, by the tall window, sat the piano that had not found a buyer. A Nabe Grand, walnut, its lid propped, its harp gleaming like a good secret. The bench was pulled out, the fallboard was up. No one sat there. But the song did not stop. Rhodes stepped closer, palms open, as if approaching an animal. Fenwick circled wide, eyes on corners and thresholds. Rhodes leaned and looked under the body of the piano the way a child looks under a bed. Empty. No pedals depressed. No one hiding. The music flowed with the serene confidence of someone who had forgotten to be afraid. The keys moved. Not all of them, just the ones the melody asked for, but they moved as surely as if struck by fingers. Rhodes watched a middle C rise and fall. He put his hand near the key, not touching, feeling only the movement of warm air. He swallowed. His throat made a sound like a small door closing. Player mechanism, Mr. Patel whispered from the doorway, half hopeful. Some have rolls hidden in the belly. Rhodes eased the bench back with his shin and lifted the front panel below the keys. Inside, felted hammers, whips, jacks, springs, everything that makes a grand, no motor, no roll. No belts, just the old generous mechanics of wood and intention. He let the panel fall softly back into place. The music reached the place where the melody thins into light. Fenwick walked the ground floor with calm hands and an efficient gaze. Dining room empty, kitchen empty, pantry empty, back door closed, latched, chain intact, powder room lonely and clean. Upstairs, a short hall with 2 bedrooms and a study. She went up. Caius waited in the foyer, pulse in his wrists. The house sighed the way old houses do when strangers put weight on old boards. A ceiling ticked. Somewhere a pipe tapped. The piano did not care. It turned a corner into the passage that always lands too beautifully, and Caius felt something behind his ribs try to stand up. Fenwick returned. No one, she said. Windows latched, closets filled with air and dust. She cut a look at the instrument. The song decelerated like a train entering a station and came to its hush of an ending. The final chord hung and softened and then quiet. They all stood there for the kind of moment that takes its shoes off before it enters a room. Savannah shifted outside. Moths performed their soft violence at the glass. Across the street, a cat made a decision and took it back. Rhodes ran his hand along the piano's cheek as if it were a horse. He said, "I'm going to log this as an unsecured property check, no suspect found, no damage, no sign of forced entry. We'll notify the realtor to have a locksmith rekey and to secure the back windows." He looked at Nora. "We can sit on the block a while. If it plays again, call." Nora nodded. She had that way of nodding that promises she will do more than that. At 4, the block slept with one eye open. At 5, milk trucks wrote their notes on the morning. By 7, Rhodes had told the story to a sergeant who smiled with one corner of his mouth and said, "The city has old bones. Let it have old songs." By 11, Barrett had a locksmith on a ladder checking sashes and pins. At noon, a pair of teenagers in black shirts, tagged with the name of a moving company, carried a rolled rug out to a van and joked too loudly about ghosts the way kids do when they hope fear will think they're busy and pass them by. That night, at 3:01, the music began again. Not Debussy. The opening was older, the cadence stiffer, a Bach sarabande measured like footsteps on a tile floor. Slow, precise, inevitable. Neighbors emerged as if called by the same small bell. Caius took the steps 2 at a time. Nora did not bother with shoes. Officer Rhodes arrived inside 3 minutes, not even pretending he had not parked around the corner to make it easier to be the kind of cop he wanted to be. They found the same room, the same instrument, the same absence of anyone at all. The keys rose and fell, a metronome's mind and a prayer's heart. Rhodes stood at the tail, hand on the rim, feeling the sympathetic thrum in his palm. He mouthed to Fenwick, "You feel that?" and she nodded, jaw tight. When the sarabande ended, there was a brief, polite silence, as if the empty room expected applause. The house had a history, of course. In Savannah, houses accumulate story the way live oaks gather Spanish moss, one breath, and you are clothed in what came before you. Odile Carpenter had bought the Nabe in 1974 with her first real paycheck from the conservatory where she taught. She had trained generations of children to curve their fingers like gentle pals, to count out loud, to breathe through nerves. She had hosted small recitals in the front parlor, little boys in stiff collars, little girls with bows that smiled even when they didn't. Caius knew this because in the weeks after the second night, he took to visiting old Mrs. Beaumont on the next block, who had been Odile's friend since summer dresses cost less than a bus ticket. He brought her ginger tea, she brought him names. Odile did not marry, Mrs. Beaumont said, with the complicated pride some women use to say a woman chose herself. Odile did not need to. She kept afternoons for students and evenings for pieces she wanted to meet again. If you heard music after midnight, it was because her mind had decided to go walking and her hands did not want her to go alone. Caius asked about family, about nieces, about anyone who might have keys. Mrs. Beaumont leaned back. The nieces did right by her. But Odile's real legacy is in the wrists of children, who can now make a room ask for mercy. She smiled. If the house is playing at 3, maybe it's just remembering how to talk. The third night brought rain hard enough to erase chalk from sidewalks. The piano began at 3:04 with something American Copland, maybe open and upright as a prairie. The left-hand octaves came like fence posts along a road. Rhodes stood in the hall, dripping on the polished heart pine, and felt the hair along his arms think the thought it thinks before it stands. The sound was too clear, too present, to be a speaker hidden somewhere. He pressed his ear against the underside of the keyboard, reckless and gentle all at once, and listened there. He heard woodworking, felt creak and give. He pulled back and swallowed rain. Fenwick called the lab, not because lab techs solve hauntings, but because she trusted men and women who make their living saying, this is a fact and this is not. The lab sent a sound engineer on the 4th night. He arrived with a small case and an undramatic face, set up microphones, and mapped the way the sound bloomed in the room. He traced it like a weather system. He shook his head, not unhappily. It's a piano, all right. It's hammers striking strings. The waveforms don't lie. He gestured at the action, the fallboard, the keys. If it isn't a person, it's a mechanism I have never met. You'd think it was a player, Mr. Patel offered again, stubborn as a superstition that used to keep you safe. But where's the roll? Nora crouched and put her palm flat on the bare floor in front of the lyre, breath held like a child listening to a secret inside a seashell. She looked up. Feel that. They all did. Not a vibration exactly, more like a miniature version of thunder when it is far and polite. As if the house were a body with a heart beating very, very softly. Caius began to arrive early, at 2:45, with a folding chair and a thermos. He took notes in a small pad he used when hand-lettering menus for restaurants. Tempo, piece, weather, number of listeners. He discovered that the set lists, if that is what they were, made a kind of sense. Debussy the first night, liquid and moonbitten, Bach the second, exacting and austere, American the third, shoulders back. On the 5th night came Chopin, a nocturne in E minor that stepped like someone finding their way through their own house in the dark without turning on the light. On the 6th, Satie, that famous gymnopédie that sounds like someone remembering a conversation and only later realizing what they should have said. On the 7th night, the piano did not play. At 3 o'clock, the block held its breath, and then, shy or wise, let it go. Caius packed his chair, embarrassed at his own hope. Nora turned on her porch light and then, half smiling, turned it back off. The realtor, nervous about liability, scheduled a full inspection the next day. A structural guy with hands like shovels walked the joists and hummed. A piano tech from Tybee Island arrived with a satchel and a reverence. He took the action apart and laid its bones gently on a quilt. He showed them the jacks, the whippins, the flanges. He pressed dampers against strings, counted, and pronounced the instrument healthy for its age and history. He found only one oddity, and it was not mechanical. Tucked inside the case, caught between the soundboard and a brace, was a small envelope the color of tea. It had been there a long time. On the front, in Odile's hand. For the person who hears it, the room forgot how to breathe for a second. The piano tech handed the envelope to Barrett, who handed it to Nora, who looked at Caius and then at Officer Rhodes and said, "You better." Caius opened it. Inside, one page in a tight old-fashioned script, "If you are reading this, You are listening, Odile had written. If you are listening, you may hear what most houses forget to say out loud. I have taught many to count, I have taught some to sing. I have failed some and forgiven myself slowly. I left the piano because I could not bear the idea of it being lonely if I took it somewhere that did not know this air. If it plays when I am gone, let it. If it stops, let it rest. I have, in the middle of the night, heard keys move under my hands without me having asked them to. I have believed this was grief, and then believed it was kindness, and then believed it was just the way wood remembers being a tree. If you must name it, call it practice. The letter ended with a short list of pieces she loved at 3 in the morning and a small instruction in parentheses that was not, in fact, written with those marks, but with Odile's own delicate dashes. Leave the north window a finger's width open when it is not raining. The instrument likes to hear the live oaks whisper. That night, clouds flew low, too hurried to stay. At 2:59, Caius propped the north window only a sliver, just enough for the air to acknowledge the room. At 3, nothing. At 3:01, the first notes of the Goldberg variations rose and unbuttoned the dark. Savannah kept her manners. Crowds did not gather. People did not shout or film with the kind of greed that makes things smaller. They sat on stoops with mugs. They stood in hallways with their hands around their own wrists, the way people stand with themselves at wakes. The police came when called, then stayed uncalled. Barrett, the realtor, began to arrive too, not because it helped sell the house, but because he had not known a job could include being present for something that did not ask for money. On the 10th night, a woman in a green raincoat stopped on the front steps and did not come inside. She was in her 40s, hair cut short for hot weather, hands with a musician's map of callous and grace. When the piece ended, a Schubert impromptu that made the room softly astonished, she said, quietly, Odile? Mrs. Beaumont, hearing it, came in on Caius's arm and said the name, the way a friend says it when the friend is late on purpose. Juniper Miles, she said, piano class of 1997, the only student Odile ever called ferocious. Juniper smiled and made a face that admitted both pride and apology. I left for Chicago and then for everywhere else. I did not come back when I should have. I am here now. She looked at the nabe. May I? The house gathered itself. Juniper sat on the bench, didn't touch for a count of 5, then set her fingers where they had learned once to listen. She played something that did not need a name, the way warm water does not need a name when you have been cold too long. In the middle of the phrase, a note moved that she had not struck. It came into the chord like a clever friend inserting a joke. Juniper laughed under her breath, cheeks wet, and shifted. The instrument and the woman spoke for a while like people who had promised not to argue and then argued anyway and then remembered why they loved each other. It went on for 3 weeks. Not every night, not on demand. Sometimes the house slept. Sometimes the city rained too hard for even ghosts to be heard. Sometimes a siren ran its thin salt line down the block and the piano waited until the sound had passed. Once, in the middle of a storm that made the gutters spit, it played a lullaby Odile had composed for a boy named Manu in 1986 when his mother was sick and he kept falling asleep on the bench. Mrs. Beaumont recognized it and cried without bothering to hide it. The story found its small, polite way into the paper, 2 paragraphs on page 3, written by a local reporter who understood that fact and wonder are not enemies. The headline used the word mystery because that is the word that lets everyone keep their peace. No one mocked, no one tried to monetize. In a city that sells its own past by the scoop, that was a kind of miracle. On the last night, October arrived dressed as September's tired sister. The air cooled, the live oaks shook their sleeves. Caius woke at 2:40, not startled, just called. He walked across the street, unlocked the door with the realtor's blessing, and sat in the dark. He did not bring a thermos. He did not bring his pad. At 3, the piano did not start. At 3:03, either a 3:05. At 3:07, a tiny sound, not a key, not a pedal, cloth on wood. Juniper stepped into the parlor and took her place. She played the Lighthouse song from someone else's life, then Odile's favorite warm-up, then something Caius could not place, that sounded like forgiveness given gently and not all at once. In the second page, a breeze from the north window touched the back of his neck, a key depressed that her fingers had not chosen. Juniper did not correct it. She smiled and let the note belong. When it ended, the city had the particular quiet of a decision. Juniper stood, laid her hand on the fallboard, and moved it down slowly until the keys were covered. She did not latch it. She turned to Caius and Nora and Rhodes and Mrs. Beaumont and Barrett and Mr. Patel and the handful of others who had become the kind of congregation that forms without a bulletin. She said, "There," and it sounded like a benediction. The piano did not play at 3 after that. Not the next night, not the next week, not in November when the air remembered how to be crisp, not in December when wreaths hung and college students went home and someone left a red scarf on the iron gate and no one took it because it looked like it belonged to the fence. The house stayed empty and not empty, listed and not for long, a property and a promise. In late January, a family bought it, a dental hygienist named Leora with a laugh that took the corners off bad news. Her husband, Arlo, who repaired old radios and believed sound should be coaxed and not forced. Their daughter, Elowen 6, who walked into the front parlor, saw the nabe, put both hands flat on its cheek, and said, "Hello," as if greeting a very old dog. Juniper came on a Saturday with a claw-footed lamp Odile had loved and set it by the window without being asked. Sometimes, walking home from the shop, Caius would slow by the gate. He would hear scales around dinner time, small fingers finding middle C, laughter at wrong notes, the stern patience of a mother counting. Once, later than practice, earlier than worry, he heard a phrase of Debussy float through the sliver of the north window and thought, not possessively, but with gratitude, "You kept one thing the way it liked to be." Every now and then, at 3 in the morning, he would wake, because the body remembers the hour it learned to lean forward. He would listen. The city would give him what the city gives: a siren's shrug, a train's whisper, the far scrape of a palm frond on a gutter. He would not hear the piano. He would hear instead that quieter, deeper thing, a house that had been asked to keep a story and had kept it as long as it needed keeping, and then, with good manners and a bow, set it down. If you ever pass Jones Street near 3, look up. Someone might be washing a glass, someone might be turning a page. Someone might be dreaming a tune with their hands open on the covers. And in number 119, a girl might be asleep on the sofa with sheet music like a blanket, the north window left a finger's width open, the live oaks telling secrets in a language no one invented and everyone somehow understands. You could say nothing happened here. A vacant house made noise until it didn't. Keys moved and then they were still. Or you could say a small piece of the world did its best impression of grace and a few ordinary people showed up in time to hear it. Both things can be true. Both are enough. Wherever you are, whatever hour your own house favors, if you hear a song that has no source, let it finish, then wait one breath longer than you think you need. Sometimes, in that extra beat, you will feel the floor answer the air the way a body answers its name. And if you cannot name it, if the sensible part of you demands a mechanism, call it practice. Then stand in the doorway and be the kind of neighbor who listens.